In 2010, Osama bin Laden's son Omar gave an interview to Rolling Stone magazine, where he explained that in the summer and fall of the year 2000, Osama bin Laden was rooting for George W. Bush. In him, he saw a perfect mark, that he would take a crisis and that he would exploit it to the ends of the earth to get away with as much as possible. And Omar bin Laden was right when he said, in Bill Clinton's time, when you were more restrained, that was very smart. Not like the bull that goes running after the red scarf. Because again, as Omar bin Laden emphasized, his father's dream, he said, was to lure the United States into Afghanistan. He would do to them what he had done to the Russians, that is, bog them down and break their empire and force them out. And of course, when provided that opportunity on September 11th, that's exactly the policy that George W. Bush embarked upon. The term blowback was originally coined by the CIA in their after-action report about their successful coup d'etat against Mossadegh and for the Shah Pahlavi in Iran in 1953. And the term came to mean not just consequences of foreign policies, but long-term consequences of secret foreign policies that leave the American people essentially open to false explanations and understandings. And this, of course, was the ultimate example of that. The planes in the footage on TV appeared quite literally to come out of the clear blue sky. And the American people were profoundly affected by that. Having thought of the 1990s as peacetime, it hadn't occurred to most Americans how this attack had been provoked. And so they were susceptible to the government's explanation that they hate us simply because of our innocence. The better we are, the more they hate us. Faced with such an irrational, religiously inspired, implacable enemy such as this, America had no choice but to embark on a massive defensive war without end against not just those who had attacked us, but anyone that our government claimed was a threat that needed to be preempted. Now, the reality is, as I write in my book Fool's Errand, the Taliban were willing to negotiate the extradition of Osama bin Laden. George Bush said no negotiations. They said they wanted some evidence of his guilt and that they would transfer him to a Muslim country, which could have been Jordan, which could have been Egypt, which could have been Turkey, who would have continued to extradite him onto the United States immediately. They then later dropped their demands for evidence, said they'd give him over to Pakistan, and lastly, to any third country other than the United States, and I guess presumably Israel. Bush said no negotiations, not good enough, started the war instead, and ended up letting Osama bin Laden escape. American Special Operations Forces had intelligence that bin Laden was in Nangarhar province in the White Mountains, headed east toward the Pakistan border by late November. By the second week in December, the CIA Special Activities Division paramilitaries and the Army Delta Force operators, along with some local Afghan militiamen, had bin Laden, al-Qaeda, and their fellow travelers cornered at a place called Tora Bora there in the White Mountains in Nangarhar province. And it is true that the Bush administration called out the Air Force and Special Operations air power against al-Qaeda there and did decimate as many as 500 of them, dropped a 15,000-pound daisy cutter bomb on them, did kill many hundreds of al-Qaeda and fellow travelers, and presumably could have killed Osama bin Laden. But at the same time, Delta Force operators were begging their superiors for reinforcements. There were thousands of Army Rangers available at the Bagram Air Base just north of Kabul, a helicopter ride away, while there were at least hundreds of Green Berets in the north of the country caught up in fighting against the Taliban, when these men could have been used to seal the Pakistani border and prevent al-Qaeda from escaping. And this isn't just hindsight. This was the complaint of the CIA and the Delta Force operators at the time as they begged for reinforcements. And in fact, the CIA commander Gary Burnson had his CIA commander go to the White House, spread out a map of Nangarhar province on the floor, and explain to George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney where they needed their reinforcements to seal the border. They were refused the reinforcements that they needed. And then, as I think probably everyone is familiar with the narrative, that once Osama bin Laden slipped across the border into Pakistan, that was it. There was nothing the Americans could do to chase him. Or like it was an old movie where the bank robber makes it across the state line and the local sheriff has to come to a screeching halt and stomp on his hat. But in fact, Pakistan was an ally of the United States of America. And though they had backed the Taliban, which had supported Al-Qaeda, they were told from the very beginning that if they did not cooperate with the American war on terrorism in Afghanistan, that we would reduce their country to the Stone Age. And they had immediately complied. And in fact, the CIA station chief in Islamabad, Robert Grenier, had already made full arrangements with the Pakistani Frontier Corps and Army in order to protect American forces from friendly fire if they came across the border in pursuit of Al-Qaeda. They were ready to go. But Bush and his government refused to allow the Delta Force to continue the pursuit despite their repeated requests. Now, it's hard to prove conclusively, but combined with the reporting of Bob Woodward, which is based on the direct notes taken during the National Security Council meetings in the days after the September 11th attack, President Bush, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, Vice President Dick Cheney, and especially Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, from the very beginning made it clear that they did not want to make the mistake of defining the war too narrowly, and they did not want the American people under the false impression that if America decimated Al-Qaeda and killed Osama bin Laden, that was the end of the war. Rumsfeld suggested attacking Iraq immediately so the American people wouldn't get the wrong idea if bin Laden had been killed. This makes it pretty easy to conclude that they had decided to let Osama bin Laden go, that they preferred that he escape because who cared if Saddam Hussein was allegedly allies with Osama bin Laden if Osama bin Laden was already dead. Then, of course, after Bush let bin Laden escape, his administration turned around and decided to create a brand new Western European-style centralized democratic nation-state in Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul, a project which has now failed for 20 years running. President Obama famously doubled the Afghan war with the surge of 2009 through 12 and lost anyway. When President Donald Trump came into power in 2017, he escalated the air and special operations wars, but he also appointed neoconservative policy advisor Zalmay Khalilzad, the man who had helped pick the new government for George W. Bush back in 2001, to negotiate a withdrawal deal with the Taliban, a project that was successful. They signed the deal in February 2020. But the deal said that the troops wouldn't have to be gone until the spring of 2021. Just under a year later, and only 2 weeks after taking power, President Joe Biden announced in early February 2021 that the deal was canceled and American troops would be staying indefinitely. Check out my writings at antiwar.com, my show at scotthorton.org, the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, and my books, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, at enoughalreadybook.net.